1902, El Paso, Texas. Ground fog along a dry creek bed. A rope loop with no visible ends rests where it shouldn't. Footprints start and end without logic. If no one returned by dawn, who rang the bell at 3 a.m? The trestle crossed the arroyo a quarter-mile west of town, where the Southern Pacific tracks curved toward the depot. Pine timbers the color of burnt coffee held the rails 30 feet above rock and brush. In summer, the creosote sweated. Children knew not to play there, but sometimes did anyway. On the 16th of August, a boy walked out to wave at the evening freight. His mother saw him from the kitchen window. The sun hung low and turned the rails to copper wire. She looked down to wrap bread in cloth. When she looked up, the trestle was empty. His name was Samuel, 11 years old, dark hair and a gray shirt too big at the shoulders. He carried nothing in his hands. 3 witnesses saw him standing mid-span against the sky. The freight was not due for another hour. The engineer would later say the track was clear when he passed. No boy, no obstruction. The rails sang under the wheels and the firebox glowed, and nothing moved on the timbers. Samuel's mother ran to the tracks. She called his name into the arroyo. Mesquite and prickly pear grew thick below. Rattlesnakes lived in the crevices. She climbed down the embankment with her skirt gathered. The dust was fine as flour. At the base of the western trestle leg, she found 2 boot prints smaller than her hand. Beside them lay a loop of rope about 8 inches across. She picked it up. The cord was new and clean. She turned it over twice, looking for the splice. There was none. The rope formed a perfect circle without beginning or end. The yard office received a telegraph at 7:30 that evening. The message read, "See you Thursday." It was signed with Samuel's initials. The operator checked the timestamp. The wire had been sent from the depot in Lordsburg, 90 miles west. He showed the slip to the station agent. The agent went to Samuel's house. His mother said her son had never left El Paso. She held the rope loop in both hands. The agent asked if Samuel knew how to send Morse. She said no. By nightfall, 20 men gathered at the depot. They carried lanterns and rifles. The marshal organized them into pairs. They walked the arroyo, calling Samuel's name. Coyotes answered from the hills. The mesquite tore at their trousers. One man found a tin cup hung on a branch. Another found a bootlace tied in 3 knots. Neither belonged to the boy. The search continued until midnight. They found nothing else. At dawn, the marshal returned with a tracker from Fort Bliss. The tracker was a mescalero named Chato. He studied the boot prints in the dust. They were clean and deep. He followed a line of shallow marks that climbed the embankment toward the tracks. The marks grew heavier as they ascended. Chato knelt and touched the soil. He said the marks moved backward. The marshal asked what that meant. Chato said someone had walked up the slope facing away from the trestle. The weight shifted as if the person leaned into the climb. But the prints at the bottom pointed toward the arroyo. The rope loop was examined by a rigger at the rail yard. He said the cord was manila hemp, new stock. He flexed it between his fingers. The fibers were tight and the color was pale gold. He could not find where the ends joined. He soaked it in water to see if the splice would swell. The rope remained seamless. He cut it with shears. The severed ends frayed normally. He tied them together and the knot held, but the original loop had no knot. On Sunday morning, the church bell rang at 11. The sexton had not pulled the rope. He was in the vestry folding linens. The bell rang 11 times in steady rhythm. He went to the tower and found the rope hanging still. He climbed the ladder. The bell was motionless. He asked the reverend if someone else had rung it. The reverend said no. The congregation had heard it clearly. 11 chimes. The clock in the square showed 10:45. A brakeman named Howell worked the evening freight on the 16th. He told the marshal he had seen something on the trestle. Not a boy exactly. A shape in the heat shimmer. It stood near the center of the span. Howell said the shape waved. He waved back. When the locomotive reached the trestle, the rails were empty. He checked the undercarriage after they crossed. No body. No blood. He said the shape had been pale like laundry on a line. By Monday, the story had spread to Juarez and Las Cruces. A reporter from the El Paso Herald came to interview the family. Samuel's father was a telegraph operator for the railroad. He worked the night shift at the depot. He said his son knew the yard by heart but never touched the equipment. The reporter asked about the Lordsburg message. The father said it was impossible. Samuel could not send code. The timestamp showed the wire had been filed at 7:32. The search had begun at 7:15. The marshal wired Lordsburg and asked if anyone had seen a boy matching Samuel's description. The agent there replied that no boy had entered the office on the 16th. The wire logs showed no outbound message to El Paso at that hour. The marshal checked the original slip. The timestamp was clear. The initials were correct. The agent in Lordsburg suggested the message might have been sent from a line-side box. Gandy dancers used them for maintenance. But the nearest box was 12 miles east of Lordsburg. A boy on foot could not have covered 90 miles in 2 hours. On Tuesday, a rancher found drag marks in the caliche 2 miles north of the trestle. The marks were shallow at first, then they deepened as if something heavy had been pulled uphill. They led to a low ridge covered in ocotillo. At the top, the marks stopped. There was no body, no clothing. The rancher called the marshal. Chato examined the tracks. He said they moved in the wrong direction. The shallow end pointed toward the ridge. The deep end pointed toward the trestle, as if someone had started heavy and become light. The wind in El Paso blows from the west in August. It carries dust from the desert and turns the sky white at midday. On Wednesday afternoon, the wind stopped. The air became still. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an hour. A clerk at the general store said the barometer fell like a stone. By evening, a thin fog formed along the creek bed. Fog was rare in August. The fog smelled of creosote and wet stone. It filled the arroyo and climbed the trestle pilings. Men standing on the tracks could not see the ground. A woman named Vera lived in a dugout near the arroyo. She told the marshal she had heard a voice on the night of the 16th, a boy's voice calling from the fog. She could not make out the words. She said the voice moved. It started near the trestle and drifted west toward the depot. She went outside with a lamp but saw nothing. The voice stopped when the freight passed. She thought it was a trick of the rails. The freight engineer was a man named Dalton. He had driven the line for 15 years. He told the marshal the trestle sang that night. Not the usual hum of metal under load. A higher note, like a wire pulled tight. He said it started when they were a mile out. It grew louder as they approached. When they crossed the trestle, the sound stopped. He checked the rails the next day. No damage, no loose spikes. The ties were solid. The rope loop was placed on a shelf in the marshal's office. On Thursday morning, it was gone. The door had been locked. The window was shut. The marshal questioned his deputy. The deputy said he had seen the loop on the shelf at midnight. It was there when he left. When he returned at dawn, it was missing. The marshal checked the floor. No dust, no fibers. The shelf showed a faint ring where the rope had rested. Samuel's mother found a second loop on Friday. It was hanging on the clothesline behind her house. The same size, the same seamless construction. She took it down and held it to the light. The cord was identical to the first. She brought it to the marshal. He placed it beside the photograph of the original loop. They matched exactly. He asked if anyone else had been in her yard. She said no. The gate was latched. The dog had not barked. A surveyor from the Southern Pacific arrived on Saturday to map the trestle. His name was Kern. He carried a transit and a steel tape. He measured the span from end to end. 340 feet. He measured the height of the pilings. 32 feet on the west side, 29 on the east. The ground sloped. He recorded the angle of the rails and the spacing of the ties. Everything matched the original plans from 1897. He asked the marshal if anyone had measured the distance between the boot prints and the trestle leg. The marshal said no. Kern measured it himself. 14 feet. He said a boy falling from the center of the span would land at least 60 feet from the pilings. The prints were too close. By the second week, the search had expanded to a 20-mile radius. Ranchers checked their wells. Miners checked the old shafts near the Franklin Mountains. The Rio Grande was low in August, but men dragged the shallows with grappling hooks. They found nothing. A photograph of Samuel was posted at the depot and the post office. His face was serious. His hair was parted on the left. The photograph showed a small scar above his right eyebrow. His mother said he had gotten it climbing a fence when he was 6. On the 15th of August, a cowhand named Ruiz was driving cattle through the arroyo. He found a third rope loop hanging from a mesquite branch. He brought it to the marshal. The marshal now had 2 loops. The original had disappeared. Ruiz said the loop had been tied to the branch with a slip knot. When he untied it, the knot fell apart. But the loop itself had no ends. The marshal asked where exactly he had found it. Ruiz pointed to a spot 100 yards downstream from the trestle. The marshal went there with Chato. The branch showed where the rope had hung. But there was no other sign, no tracks, no disturbed ground. The temperature rose again. The fog burned off. The arroyo returned to dust and thorn bush. People began to talk about the valley. Some said there were old Spanish mines in the hills. Others said the mescalero had burial grounds near the creek. A shopkeeper claimed the trestle was built over a sinkhole. He said the company had filled it with rubble and laid the ties on top. The marshal checked the construction records. No sinkhole was mentioned. The bedrock was solid caliche and limestone. A priest from the mission in Isleta came to bless the site. He walked the length of the trestle with a censer. He prayed at each corner. When he reached the center, he stopped. He told the marshal the air felt different there, thinner, colder. The marshal asked what he meant. The priest said he could not explain it. He finished the blessing and left. He did not come back. On the 23rd, a wagon driver reported seeing a boy on the tracks near Canutillo. The boy was walking east toward El Paso. The driver stopped and called to him. The boy did not answer. The driver climbed down and approached. The boy vanished. The driver said he did not run or hide. He simply was not there anymore. The marshal rode to Canutillo with a deputy. They found no tracks, no witnesses. The driver was known to drink, but he swore he had been sober. A railroad inspector named Taft arrived from San Antonio to review the case. He read the reports and examined the rope loops. He interviewed the engineer and the brakeman and the station agent. He measured the trestle again. He checked the telegraph logs. He found no mechanical explanation. He wrote in his summary that the boy had likely fallen and the body had been carried off by animals. The marshal disagreed. No blood had been found, no torn clothing, no bones. Taft said the desert was efficient. The marshal said a body does not disappear in 2 hours. Theories began to form in quiet conversations. Some said Samuel had run away and staged the disappearance. But his belongings were still in his room. His savings were untouched. His mother said he had no reason to leave. Others said he had been taken by someone in a wagon. But no wagon tracks were found near the trestle. The ground was dry and dust showed every mark. Chato said a wagon would have left ruts deep enough to last a week. A few spoke of the heat. The trestle absorbed sunlight all day and radiated it at dusk. Mirages were common in August. The brakeman might have seen a shimmer and mistaken it for a boy. But 3 people had seen Samuel walk onto the trestle. His mother had watched from 50 yards away. The light was good. The air was clear. He had been real. Others mentioned the arroyo itself. Flash floods carved strange channels through the limestone. Caves opened and closed with the rain. A boy might fall into a hidden shaft and be buried by collapsing rock. But no rain had fallen in 3 weeks. The ground was hard as brick. Chato walked every foot of the arroyo floor. He found no voids, no cracks wide enough for a body. A doctor from Fort Bliss suggested that Samuel had suffered a seizure and wandered into the desert. He might have become disoriented and died of exposure. His body could be miles away. But the search had covered the likely routes. Dogs had been used. They found no scent trail beyond the boot prints at the trestle. The doctor had no answer for the telegraph or the rope loops or the bell. The strangest idea came from a geologist passing through on his way to the copper mines in New Mexico. He had heard the story at the hotel. He told the marshal that the Franklin Mountains were full of faults, old seismic fractures that ran deep into the earth. Sometimes ground shifted without warning. A person standing in the wrong place might fall into a fissure that closed behind them. The marshal asked if such a thing had ever been documented. The geologist said no, but he said the land was older than anyone knew. It had its own rules. On the 1st of September, the station agent found a leather satchel in the telegraph office. It was tucked behind the desk where the wire machine sat. Inside was a ledger bound in red cloth. The pages were brittle, the ink was faded, the handwriting was tight and slanted to the right. The ledger belonged to a previous station agent named Howell, not the brakeman, a different man who had worked the depot in 1889. The entries recorded daily train movements and freight weights and passenger counts. The last entry was dated October 3, 1889. It read, "Boy at Trestle Sunset, waved twice, checked span after crossing, clear, rope loop found at base of west piling, no ends visible. Notified marshal. Search yielded nothing." The current station agent showed the ledger to the marshal. The marshal read the entry 3 times. He asked if anyone else had seen it. The agent said no. The satchel had been behind the desk for years. No one had opened it. The marshal checked the town records. In October of 1889, a boy named Thomas Wardlow had disappeared near the trestle. He was 11 years old. The case was never solved. The marshal found a photograph in the archive. Thomas looked like Samuel. Same dark hair. Same serious expression. The scar above the eyebrow was in a different place. The ledger was shown to Samuel's father. He recognized the handwriting. The previous agent had trained him when he started in 1895. The man's name was Howell. He had died in 1900. The father said Howell never mentioned the 1889 case. The father checked his own records. No telegraph had been received from Lordsburg on October 3, 1889, but the ledger mentioned a rope loop with no visible ends. On the 5th of September, the church bell rang at 3 in the morning. The sexton was asleep. The reverend was in Las Cruces. The bell rang 11 times. A blacksmith who lived near the church counted them. He went outside and looked at the tower. The bell was still. The rope hung without motion. He asked his wife if she had heard it. She said yes. 11 chimes. Slow and even. The clock in the square showed 3 o'clock exactly. Samuel's mother walked to the trestle at dawn. The sky was pink and the rails were cool. She stood at the center of the span and looked down into the arroyo. The mesquite had grown taller. The dust had settled into the low places. She called her son's name. The echo came back empty. She knelt and touched the ties. The wood was rough and smelled of tar. She noticed something between 2 planks. A loop of rope. Small. Seamless. The same pale gold color. She pulled it free and held it up. The cord was warm, as if it had been in the sun. But the ties were in shadow. She brought the loop home and placed it on the kitchen table. She sat and looked at it for a long time. She thought about the telegraph and the bell and the ledger. She thought about Thomas Wardlow and the 1889 disappearance. She thought about the boot prints that moved backward and the drag marks that grew lighter instead of heavier. She thought about the fog that smelled of creosote and the voice that drifted west. By October, the story had faded from the newspapers. The marshal closed the case as unsolved. Samuel's father continued working the night shift. His mother kept the rope loop in a wooden box. The trestle remained in use. Trains crossed it twice a day. Engineers reported nothing unusual. The rails hummed under weight, and the ties creaked, and the desert stretched away on both sides. In November, a boy was seen standing on the trestle at dusk. A farmer driving a wagon noticed him. The boy was small and wore a gray shirt. He waved at the farmer. The farmer waved back. He looked away to steady his horse. When he looked up, the trestle was empty. He drove to town and told the marshal. The marshal rode out to the tracks. He found nothing. No prints, no clothing, no sign anyone had been there. The rope loops remained in the wooden box. Samuel's mother counted them sometimes. 4 in total. All identical. All seamless. She tried to burn one in the stove. The flame would not take. She tried to cut one with a kitchen knife. The blade slipped off. She placed them back in the box and put the box in a drawer. On the anniversary of the disappearance, the church bell rang 11 times at sunset. No one was in the tower. The sexton checked the mechanism. The bell was locked in place. The rope had been tied off. Yet the sound had carried across the town, clear and deliberate. People stopped in the street and counted. 11 chimes. The clock showed 6:15. The trestle still stands. The wood is gray now and the rails are rusted at the joints. Trains no longer cross. The line was rerouted in 1932. The ties are loose and some have fallen into the arroyo. On certain evenings in August, when the air is still and the heat rises from the ground, a shape can be seen at the center of the span. It does not move. It does not wave. It stands against the sky, and then it is gone. If a boy waved twice and left no shadow, where does the light remember him? Subscribe so you don't miss the next story.